We only really have one thing to say about the MacBook Pro 16-inch with the M2 Max. This is the laptop to get if you want the best of the best with almost no compromises. Of course, with the exception of gaming, that is. But even that's about to change. We've been using this daily for about a month now, and at every step along the way, we were just pleasantly surprised to the point that I personally didn't touch my desktop with an RTX 3080. Now, honestly, at this point in time, the MacBook Pro 16-inch with the M2 Max in our case, it really needs no introduction. There are quite a number of things that are basically the same as before. Even so, let's just quickly go through it. If you know anything about the previous MacBook Pro 16-inch, you'll be hard-pressed to find any real physical difference between that and this. You are still going to get a really nice and slick aluminum chassis with the option for either silver or space grey. And it's going to be really well built and sturdy that can withstand the rigors of daily use, and of course, still that same great mini LED display with the 120Hz ProMotion and much more. Basically, if you were to put the previous MacBook Pro 16-inch together with this side by side, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference at all, which is not much of a surprise considering Apple's history with all their products. But is that a bad thing? Not necessarily. The MacBook Pro 16-inch feels premium through and through, and it's always been that way, and Apple has already addressed most, if not all of the concerns regarding the MacBook Pro lineup since they transitioned to the use of their own silicon. So what are the differences then? Small things really, and they are all under the hood. First up, thanks to the new M2 Pro or M2 Max, we now have HDMI 2.1, which will be able to support up to 4K 240Hz or 8K 60Hz. With more and more monitors and TVs supporting the HDMI 2.1 standard, no less thanks to the next generation consoles, this is a welcome change. In all honesty though, the previous generation should already have it, but oh well, we're glad it's here. The next difference might be small, but will prove to be mighty useful depending on your situation. The new MacBook Pros support the latest Wi-Fi 6E standard alongside Bluetooth 5.3. That means if you're in a country where you have access to Wi-Fi 6E with a compatible router and your ISP supports it, you'll be able to enjoy much faster internet speeds with yet even less traffic thanks to the 6 GHz band. Oh, and of course, how could we forget? You now get a color matching MagSafe 3 cable, but it only applies to one end and not the entire cable itself. The 140W power adapter that comes with a 16-inch is also still in the standard white. Pretty classic of Apple to do that. Interestingly however, there is one company out there that has made a GaN charger that can replace the 140W power adapter that comes with the MacBook Pro 16-inch, and it's much more versatile. This is from a company called VoteMe, and they've just recently launched a GaN charger that can output a total of 140 watts as long as you use that USB-C to MagSafe 3 cable. Safe to say, we would definitely much prefer to bring the VoteMe around, especially for events and such. Lastly, it's of course the M2 chip itself. We'll say it right now, if you already own a MacBook Pro with the M1 Max, this isn't going to be that huge an upgrade. The step up going from the M1 series to the M2 series is much more of an evolutionary one rather than a revolutionary one. In addition, if you're looking at the M2 Pro model, it's not going to perform better than the M1 Max model in most scenarios. Breaking it down in terms of relative performance, it's basically kind of like this. We have the M1, the M2, the M1 Pro, the M2 Pro, the M1 Max, and then the M2 Max. So again, if you already own the MacBook Pro with the M1 Max, this new M2 Max isn't really worth it in most ways. On the other hand, if you already own the MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro and you want more performance, that's kind of still justifiable as long as you have the cash to spare. If you're however upgrading from an Intel-based MacBook Pro, or perhaps you don't even have a MacBook Pro at all, well, this is a pretty easy decision. Then sure, by all means, consider getting either of the two new MacBook Pros with the M2 Pro or the M2 Max. You do you. With all that said, there are a few key advantages that M2 Max does bring to the table. Compared to the M1 Max, M2 Max adds an additional 2 efficiency cores, bringing the total CPU core count to 12. In addition, there's 6 more GPU cores, which brings the total GPU core count up to 38. Thanks to that, the new MacBook Pro 16 will allow you to enjoy better performance on the CPU side of things and an additional hour of use on battery. And this applies to both the 14-inch and the 16-inch with either the M2 Pro or the M2 Max, as they all share the same CPU design. In actual practice, we got just about 12 hours of battery life on a single charge with this, but it is to be noted that we use the laptop in a real-world scenario with various mixed usage, including but not limited to web browsing, video and photo editing, and much more. In most cases, it would last about 30 minutes more or so in comparison, but any additional battery life is simply a good thing, and we'll take it, no questions asked. But now, let's talk RAM, or in this case, unified memory. 64GB was the limit for the previous generation, and indeed, that's also actually the amount of RAM that we have with this very MacBook Pro with the M2 Max. But if you ever need more RAM, you can actually choose to go with 96GB of RAM, as long as you have that much spare cash at least. Going from 32GB to 96GB will inflict an additional damage of 1,200 Singapore dollars or 800 US dollars. It's quite a huge hole in your wallet just for RAM. Perhaps if you're doing heavy 3D work, that's going to be the way to go for you, but for the rest of us, 64GB is already more than plenty, and 32GB is probably the sweet spot. With that, we've basically covered all the main differences between the previous generation and this generation. However, let's now address the elephant in the room, or elephants in this case. There are two main hidden changes that Apple did under the hood that the average consumer would never know should they not use their system to its fullest potential. Yes, we are talking about the increased clock speeds and temperatures, as well as the slower SSD speeds with the new M2 series MacBook Pro. Regarding the clock speeds, the new M2 Max in the MacBook Pro 16-inch will run up to 3.3 GHz for the performance cores and up to 2.4 GHz for the efficiency cores, while drawing just about 35 watts of power for most intense workloads. This is actually still a pretty healthy boost in comparison to the previous M1 Max, even though it's a far cry from what Apple actually states. With that additional performance, however, comes higher temperatures. Under sustained workloads, especially those that would utilize both the CPU and the GPU at the same time, you'll basically see the chip running at 100 degrees Celsius to 102 or 103 throughout the entire load duration. While we might not have tested the MacBook Pro 16-inch with the M1 Max previously, we understand from other reviewers that it ran just a little cooler at about 97 to 98 degrees Celsius in the same workloads. None of them are great temperatures. Of course, especially when compared to thin and light gaming laptops nowadays that can push 70 degrees Celsius or at most 80 degrees Celsius under full load. But Apple has always prioritized noise over thermal since time immemorial, so there really isn't anything surprising about it at this point. At the very least, surface temperatures are still well within reason. We could just use the laptop fine even under load, so no worries there. Overall, despite the higher temperatures, the M2 Max will still run at the higher clock speeds, and in any test that we threw at it, it certainly did result in higher performance over the M1 Max. As for the matter regarding the SSD speeds, in our opinion, that's perhaps of a bigger concern. To be clear, this only affects the base configuration with the 512GB SSD for either the 14-inch or the 16-inch model. So if you opt for the 1TB or above, like this, we have 2TB here, this will not be of concern. Essentially, what Apple did was that they went with larger capacity memory modules with the new MacBook Pros. So, unlike before where there were 4 or 5 chips for a total of 512GB, there's just now 2 chips. We aren't going to dive in too technical with this, but in very simple terms, think of it as running single channel RAM instead of dual channel RAM. This leads to a huge loss in performance, we are talking about half the read and write speeds with this new generation should you go with the base SSD storage. If we were looking at, say, the MacBook Air, we would say that it isn't that big of a deal considering the target audience and the actual use cases from actual users with the MacBook Air. But for a MacBook Pro, pretty much the de facto pro machine for professionals, you might want to consider getting at least 1TB of SSD storage instead and just ignore the base option. Pretend it doesn't exist. Totally. Just pretend it doesn't exist at all. Just wipe it off from existence. It shouldn't even be there. And so we come to our experience with the MacBook Pro 16-inch with M2 Max. What can we say? It's just pretty much fantastic. We used it for just about everything. Web browsing, consuming content, documents, file transfers, photo and video editing, all of that. It seriously just ran things like a champ. As mentioned, I personally didn't even touch my desktop PC, which sports a Ryzen 9 3900 XT alongside an RTX 3080. I even have a dual monitor setup to boot. But ever since Apple transitioned to their own silicon, there really isn't anything like the MacBook, or in this case, the MacBook Pro. But again, we have to say this. Only consider this if you own an Intel-based Mac, or you would like to upgrade, or you don't have a Mac and you want one. For our specific configuration, this will set you back about $4,300 US or 6,200 Singapore dollars. Our suggestion, however, is to drop that RAM down to 32 gigs and just go with a 1TB SSD. That will set you back about $3,500 US or 5,000 Singapore dollars, which is still a lot for sure. So in this instance, 0% installment plans might actually be the way to go. In any case, you guys can be rest assured that we will continue using this MacBook Pro and it will actually be one of our main editing machines, especially on the go. Performance of battery is unlike anything else. Just like with the previous MacBook Pro, despite some weird decisions by Apple, this is still an incredibly great experience. With that, if you have any questions, let us know in the comment section down below and be sure to take a look at them. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to us for more of such content. And follow us on all our social channels such as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Till the next one. See ya!